President Obama gave a speech at the National Defense University today, and it was a very important milestone speech to end the 9/11 era. That's certainly what I took away from it. He talked about how the wars were ending and how there are different time periods and different tactics and strategies that we should use in those different time periods. He even was bold enough to say that some of the terrorist strikes we face now are more similar to the ones we faced before 9/11. Knowing that the Republicans would jump in and say, I can't believe he's going to a pre-9/11 mindset. But the reality is, he said, we cannot be in perpetual war. Now, if you were following what he said on drones and Gitmo and also on press freedom, and you didn't know much of the details beforehand, you would think, wow, this is a great speech from a president who seems incredibly moderate and reasoned and passionate about protecting civil liberties while at the same time protecting the American people. President Obama is a brilliant speaker, and no one has ever disputed that. Now, the reality is, once you get into the heart of the speech, you begin to see that if you're paying attention to the details, it begins to fall apart. So let's begin with the issue of drone strikes. Now, the president had this to say first.
As much of the criticism about drone strikes, both here at home and abroad, understandably centers on reports of civilian casualties. There's a wide gap between U.S. assessments of such casualties and non-governmental reports. Nevertheless, it is a hard fact that U.S. strikes have resulted in civilian casualties, a risk that exists in every war. And for the families of those civilians, no words or legal construct can justify their loss. For me and those in my chain of command, those deaths will haunt us as long as we live, just as we are haunted by the civilian casualties that have occurred throughout conventional fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Now, those are powerful words. If only I could believe him. And I'll tell you why I don't believe him. Two things. First of all, the number of strikes and the number of civilian casualties is not a small amount. It's a fairly large amount. When you just look at Pakistan alone, and we've done drone strikes in Yemen and other countries as well, but in Pakistan from 2004 to 2013, we've had 368 strikes. Now, understand that 316 of them were under President Obama, the great majority. Deaths were from 2,537 to 3,533. Now, oftentimes people who don't know the details will say, well, look, man, he killed a lot of terrorists. That sounds good. Really? Well, let's look a little further at this. And this is independent journalists that came up with these numbers. Civilian reports killed anywhere between 411 to 884. That is an awful lot of civilians that are killed. And children dead, anywhere between 168 to 197 kids killed in those drone strikes. What happened? I thought the drone strikes were very precise. I thought that it just ripped you up inside when you had any civilians at all that died. And in fact, his top counterterrorism advisor, John Brennan, who is now the head of the CIA, comically once said that there were no civilian casualties. When reporters showed hundreds of civilian casualties, said, okay, fine, there might have been a couple. And now President Obama is saying, oh, God, that haunts me. Well, you got a funny way of showing it because you keep doing it. Now, the second point that's as important as the numbers is the kind of drone strikes we do. Because, look, drones are just a weapon. The question is, how do you use them? And if you use them in the middle of a conventional war, I don't think there'd be a lot of argument about that. If you use them to target top-level terrorists, and most Americans believe that that's what we're doing, that we're hitting top-level terrorists, that's not true. Again, according to independent journalists, we've hit, out of all of our drone strikes, only 2% have hit high-level al-Qaeda terrorists or their affiliates. Only 2%! Now, there's another broad category called militants. Now, the government says anyone who is a male within a certain bracket, and it's a very, very wide bracket of age, we consider a militant. It's up to the journalists to prove otherwise. The journalists have proved that 400 to 800 of them are civilians. The others could be militants, they could be civilians, it's not clear. But only 2% are high-level terrorists. So when you use a drone strike to hit one of those high-level terrorists, you might have a lot of Americans on your side. You might have a lot of the world on your side. But we don't just use them for that. In fact, there are three kinds of drone strikes. There are personality strikes, which is when we know who we're hitting. So stop right there and think about how amazing that is. And of course, President Obama failed to mention that distinction today in the types of drone strikes we do. We have to come up with a name for when we know we're hitting someone, the person that we're hitting. There's a whole nother name for when we don't know who we're hitting. It's called a signature strike. That's where we say, well, it looks like there's the signature activity of someone who could be a militant. Gee, I wonder why we get hundreds of civilian deaths if that's the way we do drone strikes. That's not something a person who's haunted by the civilian deaths does. Under no circumstances, if I was president of the United States, honestly, I believe you or the great majority of decent people order a signature strike when you don't know who you're hitting. And then, of course, there's a third category that's even more heinous, the double taps, where you hit a target, and when then first responders come to help the wounded, you hit them again. Now, if you're haunted by the civilian deaths, would you really order double taps where you kill first responders coming to help the wounded? Really haunted? Doesn't sound very haunted. And of course, that's the part of the speech he doesn't tell you. He's great at speaking, actually is a whole different matter. Now he continues.
But as Commander-in-Chief, I must weigh these heartbreaking tragedies against the alternatives. To do nothing in the face of terrorist networks would invite far more civilian casualties, not just in our cities at home and our facilities abroad, but also in the very places like Sana'a and Kabul and Mogadishu, where terrorists seek a foothold. Remember that the terrorists we are after target civilians, and the death toll from their acts of terrorism against Muslims dwarfs any estimate of civilian casualties from drone strikes.
Two terrible excuses. One is, well, look, the terrorists are worse than us. They kill more civilians. Congratulations. We're not supposed to be anywhere near them. Yes, we should hunt down the terrorists, obviously, right? But it's not a bragging point to say we kill less civilians than the terrorists do. And then second of all, the straw man that he set up in the beginning there, either we do nothing or we do exactly what I'm doing. No, those are not your two options. For example, you can do what you did in the bin Laden raid. You can land the helicopters and you can get them that way. Now, look, later in the speech, he said how impractical that is. I don't know if I believe him. I don't know if you should believe him. But okay, that's a fair argument at least. You could do drone strikes against top-level al-Qaeda operatives and senior leaders and say, God, be incredibly careful. And if we have civilians in the area, don't take the strike. Now, that's a way of doing drone strikes where you're not risking significant and sometimes massive civilian casualties. So the two options aren't either we do things exactly as Obama's doing or nothing at all. No. Okay, I guess you want us to do nothing. No, that's not what I want you to do. I want you to prosecute the war against terror with some shred of decency so we know definitively that we're better than those guys. He continues.
Where foreign governments cannot or will not effectively stop terrorism in their territory, the primary alternative to targeted lethal action would be the use of conventional military options. Conventional air power or missiles are far less precise than drones and are likely to cause more civilian casualties and more local outrage. And invasions of these territories lead us to be viewed as occupying armies, so it is false to assert that putting boots on the ground is less likely to result in civilian deaths or less likely to create enemies in the Muslim world. The results would be more U.S. deaths, more Black Hawks down, more confrontations with local populations, and an inevitable mission creep in support of such raids that could easily escalate into new wars.
Once again, straw man argument. You either do as I tell you, or you get Bush, massive, ridiculous invasions of countries. We had nothing to do with attacking us, and we also have Black Hawk down, and we have all these terrible things that would happen if you didn't do precisely what I'm doing. But we didn't. The reality is those are not your only two options. The reality is you have another option, which is don't do signature strikes and drone strikes. I'm sorry, double tap strikes. And the reason for that is not just because it's indecent and immoral and, by the way, illegal according to international law. It's also because it's counterproductive. you wind up creating more people fighting us than you started with in the first place. And by the way, that's exactly why the defense industry loves them, because they need more enemies so they can sell more weapons. That's the reality. Now, he's not done yet. This was really important because he's going to talk about U.S. citizens that we have targeted. Listen.
For the record, I do not believe it would be constitutional for the government to target and kill any U.S. citizen with a drone or with a shotgun without due process. But when a U.S. citizen goes abroad to wage war against America and is actively plotting to kill U.S. citizens, and when neither the United States nor our partners are in a position to capture him before he carries out a plot, his citizenship should no more serve as a shield than a sniper shooting down on an innocent crowd should be protected from a SWAT team. That's who Anwar al-Awlaki was.
No, wait a minute. There's two huge problems there. Number one, Anwar al-Awlaki, according to our own admission, was not in the middle of a battlefield. He was not in the middle of shooting. He was in the middle of lunch. So they have twisted the term imminent threat completely. In fact, they write in one of their memos, which they revealed to Congress, that imminent doesn't mean imminent. It doesn't mean immediate. It means, well, he might do something again at some point, so we're going to take him out. So that idea of the sniper on the roof is a very poor analogy, and President Obama knows it. Now, you might say, hey, look, Anwar al-Awlaki might have ordered 2 bombings at least against the United States, so I'm not too concerned about his rights. But it isn't about that guy. It's about our rights. So the more important point there is when President Obama says citizenship is not a shield, that's a very dangerous precedent to set. Because in terms of rights, it's supposed to be a shield. That's the whole point. We have certain rights as citizens of the United States of America. Now look, as I've explained over and over in here, I don't think we should do the citizens of any country. But this is a constitutional issue here in the United States that's very important, and it's a red line that should not be crossed. And here he is saying, well, if I judge him to be a kind of a threat that's somewhat imminent, then I take away all of his rights. Now, your citizenship does not shield you if you're in the middle of a gunfight. Everybody knows that. If you're endangering other people's lives at that point, of course the cops can shoot you. But your citizenship does give you due process rights if you're not in the middle of a gunfight. If you're eating lunch, as a lot of these guys were when they got a drone dropped on them, we're supposed to give you some due process. And look, it's fair to say, my God, how the hell were we supposed to arrest Anwar al-Awlaki in the middle of Yemen? I understand that. But what they could have done, at the very least, is indict al-Awlaki here in the United States. You know how easy that is? In law school, they teach you basically this funny little colloquialism, which is that you could indict a ham sandwich if you want. Because indicting something is so easy. There's no defense attorney there, okay? But we wouldn't even do that with al-Awlaki. What if we have all that evidence against him? Why don't you just show 10% of it and indict him and give him some due process? The reason is they don't want due process. They want to be able to have the power to execute U.S. citizens without due process. And by the way, al-Awlaki was not the only U.S. citizen that they executed. They executed 3 others, as they just admitted yesterday. And did they give them due process? No. And here's the interesting part. Did they target them? They say no. We accidentally killed those 3. How's that for due process? How's that for being incredibly careful with our drone program? That doesn't sound very careful to me when we get it wrong 75% of the time.